Good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's last post ceremony. My name is Gerard Pratt, and joining us today from the Royal Australian Navy is Captain Lisa Batchelor. Today marks the 75th anniversary of the sinking of the Tomahawk Maru. Between January and March of 1942, 22,000 Australians were captured by Japanese forces during their advance through Southeast Asia. Once captured, prisoners of war were formed into work parties to provide forced labour for the Japanese army. Transported great distances across the Japanese Empire, Australian prisoners found themselves in Burma, Thailand, Japan, Borneo, Manchuria, Indochina, Formosa, and Korea. While the horrific experiences of the Burma-Thailand Railway and the Sandakan Death March were well known, the most dangerous period for a prisoner of war came during transportation. Those transported across the seas suffered from overcrowding, sickness, and disease. While some journeys were short, the longest voyage lasted 70 days. To the prisoners of war, the transport ships, of which they had been herded, became known as hell ships. Over 1,000 prisoners might be crammed into a space suitable for a few hundred. Prisoners were given little food and water, and there was a lack of adequate sanitary facilities. Another threat was posed by Allied submarines. On the evening of the 24th of June, 1944, the Tomahawk Maru was transporting 772 Australian, British, American, and Dutch prisoners of war from Java via Singapore to Nagasaki in Japan. The ship, which was also transporting copper ore, was part of a convoy that was just 2 hours away from its destination. Distant lights from the Japanese shore could be seen on the decks of the Tomahawk Maru, sparking celebration amongst the crew, who began singing and drinking a toast to their safe arrival. The celebration was interrupted when a torpedo fired by a waiting American submarine, the USS Tang, hit its target and lit up the night sky. The Tang fired 6 torpedoes in all, and within minutes, a tanker, a freighter, and 2 cargo ships had been hit and were sinking. 560 prisoners of war aboard the Tomahawk Maru were killed, 190 of whom were Australian. Survivors were picked up by Japanese boats. They continued to Nagasaki before being sent to prisoner of war camps in Japan. Many of the Australians killed in this incident were members of the Tasmanian-raised 2nd 40th Battalion, which had been captured during the fall of Timor. The sinking of the Tomahawk Maru was one of several occurrences of Japanese ships transporting Australian prisoners of war being sunk by Allied submarines. As we commemorate those who died during the sinking of the Tomahawk Maru, we also remember those who died during the sinking of the Montevideo Maru on the 1st of July 1942, the Harugiku Maru on the 26th of June 1944, and the Rakou Maru on the 12th of September 1944. Over 1,800 Australian prisoners of war and approximately 19,000 Allied prisoners of war in total died as a result of Japanese ships transporting prisoners of war being sunk by Allied submarines. Today, we remember the sinking of the Tomahawk Maru. We pay our respects to the men and women commemorated here on the Roll of Honour and to the survivors who returned home. Tonight, we are honoured to acknowledge General Benjamin Madrigal Jr., Chief of Staff for the Armed Forces of the Philippines, Brigadier David Wainwright, Director General, Future Land Warfare, Australia, and the accompanying delegation. We warmly welcome the contingent from the 1969 intake from the Officer Cadet School, Portsea, who are also in attendance this evening. And as always, we welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that love and support them. We acknowledge the members of RSL Services Clubs Association, RSL Victoria, and RSL Queensland, who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony from across Australia. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection by visitors to the memorial and students on behalf of the following schools. From New South Wales, Shaw Preparatory School, North Sydney, and from Queensland, Jamboree Heights State School. If able, please stand and join in singing the National Anthem. If able, please be seated. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through until the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit, in the heart of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight, we will read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 102,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and on operations for more than a century. But first, we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths or floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection.
Today we remember and pay tribute to Private George Archibald Allan Guthrie. George Guthrie was born in 1894 to James and Lucy Guthrie of Williamstown in Victoria. He grew up on Morris Street and attended St Mary's Roman Catholic School. His father was a well-known footballer in the district and a member of the local Druids Lodge. When George was still a young boy, his father's health began to fail, and he died when George was around 9 years old. George was keenly interested in the sea and worked as a stevedore on the local docks. He also served 4 years in the Royal Australian Naval Reserve. George Guthrie was among the first to offer himself for active service following the outbreak of war in 1914. He became a member of the No. 5 Company of the Australian Naval and Military Expeditionary Force that was sent north of Australia to secure German interests in New Guinea. The force captured the radio tower at Bitapaka, encountering some resistance, and then took control of the rest of the German colonised area with few problems. Guthrie returned to Australia after 6 months' service with the Australian Naval and Military Expeditionary Force. He had contracted malaria in New Guinea and continued to have periodic bouts of fever. Despite enlisting in the Australian Imperial Force in July 1915, he was not fit to be sent overseas until the following February, when his health permitted. Guthrie had been posted to the 13th Battalion, but after arriving in Egypt in March 1916, he was transferred to the 54th Battalion and continued training in the desert. The 54th Battalion was sent to France to fight on the Western Front in June 1916, and the following month participated in its first major attack near the French village of Fromelles. The attack failed disastrously, with the 54th Battalion suffering hundreds of casualties. While Private Guthrie survived, he had been wounded in the face and head and was sent to hospital in Atapla. He returned to the battalion into the field in time for the bitterly cold winter of 1916 and 1917, during which the men largely lived outdoors and rotated in and out of the front line. Towards Christmas, he contracted trench foot and was evacuated to hospital in London. Private George Guthrie took some time to recover from the problems with his feet and was sent to Salisbury Plain for an extended period. There, his military discipline was not all it could be, and he was punished a number of times for going absent without leave, missing parades, and skipping out on field punishments. These problems continued throughout 1917, and he did not rejoin the 54th Battalion on the battlefields of France until early 1918. Within weeks of Guthrie's return to France, the Germans began a major offensive. The 54th Battalion was put in reserve near the French town of Villers-Bretonneux, ready to protect the railhead at Amiens if necessary. On the 9th of April 1918, the 54th Battalion's position came under fire from the German artillery. One shell fell into the headquarters dugout, killing a number of senior officers. Elsewhere in the line, 3 other ranks were killed and 6 wounded. One of those killed was Private George Guthrie. He had been sleeping in a dugout when another shell scored a direct hit. A nearby private later said that he had been hit in the body and was badly knocked about, death being instantaneous. He was buried the following day by his comrades. Today, George Guthrie lies in Aubigny, British Cemetery, under the words, "Faithful unto death." He was 23 years old. His name is listed on the Roll of Honour on my right, amongst almost 62,000 Australians who died while serving in the First World War. His photograph is displayed today beside the pool of reflection. This is but one of the many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Private George Archibald Allan Guthrie, who gave his life for us, for our freedoms, and in the hope of a better world.
Please stand for the reading of the Ode and the sounding of the last post.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them.
We will remember them.
Lest we forget.
Lest we forget. We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Pozières or in the low scrub at Gallipoli with his poor tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, that concludes the last post ceremony. We thank you all for visiting the Australian War Memorial and wish you all a very good evening. Thank you.